people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. It would appear that Australia's own Taylor Robertson is set to make her next ring appearance this weekend south of the border in Mexico, and what I think is her Mexican debut. I don't think Taylor Robertson has ever fought there. As part of a TM boxing promotion in La Playa de Carmen, Quintana Roo, Mexico. And she will be opposite the Ring Mexico's own Fabiola Marquez, 19 years old, sporting a professional record, an upside-down record of 7 wins with 8 losses and 2 draws, 1 recorded knockout, having never been knocked out. 17 professional bouts. Very little is known of Fabiola, just that her career got off to a rather rocky start. A good number of those losses she suffered was at the beginning of her boxing career. She'll be facing Taylor Robertson. Sports a professional record of 9 wins with 1 loss, 1 draw, 2 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 11 professional bouts. Not as many fights as Fabiola, but it's another one of those quality over quantity kind of deals to where Taylor's been in there with better fighters than Fabiola has. Scheduled for 8 rounds in the women's flyweight division. The flyweight, that is where Gabby Fundora currently reigns as that division's inaugural undisputed champion. Until further notice, she's got all the marbles, she's got all the belts, and if you want one, all paths lead to Gabby. This is a deep division, and there are a lot of good fighters in it. Taylor Robertson is just one. Is Fabiola Marquez another? Can she upset the Aussie? Fabiola was last in action in December of last year opposite the ring Miriam Enda, who she decisioned over 8 rounds, though that isn't saying much. Miriam has an upside-down record like Fabiola has an upside-down record. But it is worth noting that Fabiola fought 4 times last year, so if nothing else, she was active, whereas Taylor Robertson only fought once. Close to a year ago, in March of last year, opposite the ring Gloria Gallardo, who she fought to a split draw. And that was the only fight that she had last year. So even if Taylor Robertson is a more talented fighter with a higher ceiling and a better amateur background, Fabiola has momentum going in. Taylor's got ring rust. She's getting off to an early start this year that if she makes it through this fight this weekend, she's got the entire rest of the year to do 2, maybe even 3 more fights, if her people can put them together. Her career needs momentum. She lost some last year after that draw. Before that, she fought 2 times in 2023, 3 times in 2022. Taylor's got to gain some momentum, gain some traction in her career. I haven't actually seen Fabiola in action, and I don't know where there is any footage of her, but on paper, this looks like a fight that Taylor Robertson should win. Why? Because of the girls that already beat Fabiola, 8 of them. These are lesser fighters than Taylor Robertson is. I mean, usually you can tell what a fighter's been through based on who beat them. And even the girls that beat Fabiola ain't that good. Taylor Robertson should win. She should win on points. Not being a knockout merchant, being more finesse than ferocity, a fence and fiddle kind of fighter, light on her feet. She's got movement, she's got speed and sharpness, though not power. Taylor Robertson on points is the logical way to go, so that's how I'm going. I think Taylor should get the job done this weekend. I'd be surprised if she didn't. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, earlier today, they held the kickoff press conference for the Chris Eubank versus Benn fight set to go down April 26th, and it's now being floated out there. It's now being said that whoever wins that fight will face Canelo afterwards. Who said that? Turkey LL Sheik. One of the less ambitious fights he will have made since his endeavor into the world of boxing. I'm a fan of Canelo Alvarez, but I'm not a fanatic. I have no interest of seeing someone who competes at his level face either Benn or Chris Eubank Jr. Sorry. I'm not even convinced that either of those fighters could beat the fighter that he's about to fight in unbeaten William Skull, IBF champion. That's just being honest. I don't mind the fight between them in the middleweight division, even though it does kind of come off like a novelty act based on their surnames.
Nepotism.
When you think about the circumstances, they are in very different places in their careers. Chris Eubank Jr. has been around a bit longer, fought at higher weights than Conor. Comparatively, Chris's career is further along, whereas Conor still had so much to prove at welterweight that to jump up to middle like this.
It's a circus act.
Besides the fights that your fathers had, what actual precedent was there for you two to fight to even begin with? Now, I know that since then, things have happened, and they've gotten personal between Chris and Conor, but from the very beginning, it seems like the only thing that brought you two boys together was your daddies, was your surnames.
The only reason for you to fight was because your fathers fought some time ago.
Take away the surnames, and Conor's a welterweight that has a lot to prove at welterweight, which he still hasn't, and Chris is a middleweight, sometimes a super middleweight, that couldn't quite make it at world level.
Couldn't cut it.
Take away the surnames, and they're different fighters that compete at different weights. They're in different places in their careers, and if not for the legacy of their fathers, there would be no real reason to have brought them together. But since they have, there is bad blood between them. Maybe there wasn't before, but there is now.
Seems like a cash grab.
Because they know they can sell it. They know it'll do well in the UK.
It's a cash grab.
Seems more like a cash grab to me for Conor than it does for Chris, and that might seem strange, but remember that before we got here, they were talking about putting him in there with Mario Barrios. He was going to get a shot at an alphabet title, a world title. You sacrificed that for this.
Can't we say the same thing about Chris? He was supposed to be fighting Lara. If this fight didn't happen, he was going to fight for a title too.
Yeah, but Chris is in his mid-30s. He's further along in his career. He doesn't have that many good years left. Conor does, so that if you move up now to middleweight and you actually win, you can't go back down.
Not safely.
It's not like it is with the women. The men don't get to fluctuate in weight as much, perhaps because they shed muscle when they do it, and that hampers their performance, their ability to perform. If they fluctuate in weight, if you shoot all the way up, then try to go back down.
May not be the same guy you were.
As opposed to the women, we see the women boxers fluctuate in weight a lot more, maybe because they're shedding water weight and fat, lipids. The guys, they're shedding muscle when they do it, and you don't want that.
Maybe the girls are shedding a little bit of muscle when they do it, but not as much as the guys, which is why moving up and down affects them more. Affects them worse.
He goes up there, he fights Chris Eubank Jr. at middleweight. Is it safe to say that he's done at welter?
It might be.
And that's if he actually wins. If he loses, it's even worse.
It might be.
Because then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You may not be able to make welterweight healthy anymore, so you might drop the junior middle. That's a very deep division, very dangerous one.
It's just too much to think about there, too many variables. But what they're saying is that whoever wins the fight, whether it's Conor or Chris, they will then get to fight Canelo Alvarez.
Canelo, who's supposed to be fighting William Skull in May, then Terence Crawford in September. Thus, if he is to face the winner of this fight, they must be talking about either towards the end of the year or May of the next one.
I don't want to see that.
Just being honest, I have no desire, no interest as a boxing fan to see Canelo Alvarez fight either of these guys. Give me Canelo versus Pacheco, Canelo versus Mabili.
I don't want to see him fight either Conor Benn or Chris Eubank Jr.
This will give rise to more of the same criticism that Canelo Alvarez is not facing David Benavidez from the same people who don't want to accept that that ship already sailed.
It's done.
Like it or lump it. David can't make 168 healthy anymore. He just had his second fight at 175.
Isn't he supposed to be targeting Dimitri Bivol now that he's undisputed champion?
Same old tired conversation. There's nothing to add to it.
Nothing new.
Like it or lump it. It looks like that ship has sailed, and you need to find something else to focus on.
I do not want to see Canelo versus Conor Benn or Canelo versus Chris Eubank Jr. I don't really care for either of those fights.
But Canelo Alvarez did ink a 3 or 4 fight deal with Turki El Sheikh, and it's conceivable that 1 or 2 of those fights are going to be easy ones and lighter touches.
You don't think William Skull is a lighter touch?
Not in according to Hoyle lighter touch. He's an unbeaten champion.
You don't think Terence Crawford is a lighter touch?
It's not just about what I think. Some people think that Terence Crawford is going to win. Some people think he's going to outpoint Canelo Alvarez. So because feelings are so mixed when it comes to that fight, he's not an according to Hoyle lighter touch either.
And according to Hoyle, lighter touch is somebody who everybody agrees doesn't stand a chance, where some people, they think Terence does.
Too many opinions, too many variables, and too much to think about. All I know is I'm not interested in seeing Canelo fight Benn or Chris Eubank Jr. Whoever wins, I'm not interested.
I don't like those fights.
It's going to be a shitstorm if Canelo were to face the winner of that fight. I can only hope that Turkey's just reading the room right now, feeling things out, that he's made that proposition, but he's not married to it. Based on how people respond to the proposition, he will act accordingly. If they like it, then he'll do it, and if they don't, then they won't.
I hope he doesn't.
You already have enough people spending enough time criticizing Canelo whenever they get the chance. I remember that ahead of this weekend's fight, Paulie Malignaggi,
Former champion turned commentator, analyst.
he said, I think Madramov's a better fighter than Canelo, especially the Canelo at this point, but he's still big and strong. I think Madrimov will have made Crawford think more than Canelo will.
The Madrimov that just got beat by Virgil Ortiz and Terence Crawford before that.
You have to wonder, in light of this weekend's performance, does he still think he's a better fighter than Canelo Alvarez? Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? Going into this weekend's fight, what did Israel have? 11? 12 fights? And those 12 fights were enough for you, in your professional opinion, to think he's a better fighter than Canelo? Or was that just you taking another opportunity, another shot at Canelo Alvarez? A former champion turned analyst, a commentator like a Paulie Malignaggi with years of experience is held to a different standard than either I or you, to where when he analyzes a fight or analyzes a fighter, fighters,
It's supposed to be wisdom. These are supposed to be professional insights, not preferences.
too many people in the sport of boxing on both sides of the business love to play favorites to where you can never trust anybody's annotations, no matter what their background is, even in the case of a former champion turned analyst.
Not even his.
Not even a Paulie Malignaggi, who once was regaled as one of the best commentators and one of the best analysts in the business. These days, he's just as biased as the fans are.
Angry.
Angry that Canelo Alvarez didn't fight David Benavidez, because that's what it's all about. That's what the anger stems from.
It's because of that.
Canelo Alvarez has faced enough criticism from enough people that fight didn't materialize, that should he then face the winner of Eubank versus Benn, that's just going to leave the door open for even more criticism, more people taking more shots at him.
Is it warranted?
I guess it all depends on who you ask. I've been watching the sport of boxing long enough that I know sometimes fights don't happen. Manny Pacquiao, when he was still at top rank, Bob Arum wanted to put him in the ring with Terence Crawford, but it didn't materialize. It didn't happen.
Floyd Mayweather, towards the tail end of his career, had Keith Thurman as a mandatory challenger, but he never fought him.
An adequate parallel for what we see with Canelo and David Benavidez.
There are other fights for David.
That facing Canelo Alvarez doesn't have to be the end-all and be-all for that young fighter who's campaigning at only his second weight. He's one of 3 mandatory challengers in the queue for Dimitri Bivol, who is the newly crowned undisputed champion. There is Germany's own Michael Eiffert, who's next in the rotation and has been the mandatory challenger via the IBF longer than anybody, longer than David Benavidez and longer than Callum Smith.
He achieved his mandatory status close to 2 years ago, in March of 2023, when he took on former champion Jean Pascal.
Second in the rotation is David Benavidez, who's the mandatory challenger by way of both the WBA and the WBC. And last is the WBO's mandatory challenger, former champion Callum Smith, who achieved mandatory status this past weekend, beating unbeaten Joshua Buatsi.
I could go for David Benavidez versus either of them, either Michael Eiffert or Callum Smith.
Taking away the polarization we often see amongst the different factions of fans who love to feud and fuss and argue with each other,
I could go for either of those fights for David Benavidez, and either one of them would be another credible scalp for him. When you think about Michael Eiffert is a pure boxer, a mover, a jabber, an outside fighter.
not big on power.
But unbeaten and top 10 in this division. David Benavidez has the right ingredients and the right style to walk him down and wear him out.
You guys know that I'm not high on David Benavidez, not at all. I don't think much of this very basic pressure fighter, but being a pressure fighter, that's what he needs to be against Michael Eiffert. Keep the pressure on, keep on him, and wear him down.
Michael's claim to fame is facing a 40-year-old John Pascal who was so obviously past it and couldn't keep up with him. If Pascal were a few years younger, in his prime, he would have knocked this kid's block off. But that's his claim to fame.
Beating an old John Pascal, David Benavidez, who's in his prime years and has the right base style for the job, should be able to walk Michael down and wear him out. Now, it is a little bit more tricky with Callum Smith.
Unlike Michael Eiffert, Callum Smith has stopping power. Callum has more knockouts as a light heavyweight than David does.
He knocked out Lenin Castillo, hit the guy so hard he gave him a seizure. He knocked out Lenin Castillo. He knocked out Carlos Galvan. He knocked out Matthew Bowderleek. He looked impressive with Joshua Buatsi, even though he didn't stop him. He came close a couple of times. He hurt him.
The Smith fight is a trickier fight for David Benavidez, but still winnable.
He has to impose his will on Callum Smith. Force him onto his back foot where he's uncomfortable. In the past, the fighters that have given Callum the most problems are the guys who crowd him. That's John Ryder, that's Canelo, that's Artur Beterbiev. Mid-range to inside fighters. And David is a mid-range to inside fighter, a prolific one.
He throws a lot of punches, even though he's not big on power.
He's big on activity, and he's a close quarters fighter. Objectively speaking, David's got some of the right ingredients for Callum Smith.
What makes it a good fight?
Callum isn't half bad in the pocket so long as he's the one leading the dance. You have to force him back. Force him onto his back foot, because if you can't, that catch and counter left hook might meet you at the door.
And I do think he hits harder than David.
That's why he has more knockouts as a light heavyweight than David does. David hasn't knocked anybody out since moving up to light heavy.
David does have the right base style for the job, some of the right ingredients, but Callum does have power, a good catch and counter left hook,
and a hell of a right cross. Joshua Buatsi knows all about that as he was slipping his jab and countering with the right. David Benavidez is no defensive wizard. He can be caught, and we just saw that in his last fight with David Morrell. David Benavidez tries for a right uppercut, leaves the left side of his face open to be countered, and it is by a hard, well-placed right hand from David Morrell that visibly rocked him. So both boys got a shot, both Callum Smith and David Benavidez. It makes for a great fight.
That we don't need to keep beating a dead horse and talking about the same thing when it comes to a Canelo fight. There are other fights out there for David Benavidez if he is willing to have them.
And I'm sure that Turkey LL Sheik would pay him well to have such a fight on either a Ring Magazine card or a Riyadh Season show. The opportunity is there.